But the choice of Alice Nkom is even more symbolic. Why? Because Alice Nkom is not just any lawyer. She is one of the most internationally recognized human rights lawyers in Cameroon. Her credibility does not come from a party machinery or political patronage, but from a long-standing career that she has used to defend human rights even when they are risky. A campaign spokesperson can be a mere communicator, but in this case, she is a validator. She is not a spokesperson for the campaign, but for a government. At this material point, let's assume that Tchiroma was at the presidency in Etudi, following the results from the ballot box. Whether you support Tchiroma or not, whether you agree with Barrister Nkom or not, this development signals that the post-election crisis is far from over. In politics, personnel is always the strategy, and the appointment of Barrister Nkom is not mere personal choice. It is a message about legitimacy, resistance, and the kind of narrative Tchiroma intends to build around his claim to the presidency. Cameroon now faces a question that will shape its immediate future. That question is, will this post-electoral crisis be resolved through force, intimidation, and arrests, or through dialogue? What Tchiroma's appointment of Barrister Alice Nkom actually means for Cameroon's political future. You are welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast, where we share African stories that change lives. I am your host, Ngalim Bernard. Before we get into this important analysis, kindly like, subscribe, share, and comment. And I invite you to watch this to the end, because I bring to you in-depth analysis and information around this appointment. When I last spoke to you about Tchiroma's silence, I said a lot of things, but one of the things I said was, we do not know the approach Tchiroma is going to use when he speaks next. So, watch this video and remember what we spoke about. Now, what do you make?
Tchiroma's silence may just be pregnant. It may not only be silence. It is silence that, when it gives birth, re-energizes and gives new momentum to Cameroonians. That alone ensures that the matter is far from resolved. Simply because when a long-time ally breaks ranks, the regime cannot simply ignore him. Silence is common, but silence is not dismissal. The regime cannot ignore Tchiroma. They know what Tchiroma can do. Tchiroma defended them, played their PR role, and gave them good reputation over the years. So they know that what comes out of Tchiroma's mouth is likely going to be met either with appreciation or rejection. But they also know that anyone Tchiroma is talking to understands that Tchiroma understands the inner workings of the regime, and whatever he says is given credibility. So meanwhile, the public should resist being drawn into panic.
Now, what do you make of Tchiroma's silence and his appointment of Barrister Alice Nkom as his spokesperson? Tell me what you think in the comments section. I always invite you to leave comments because I want to hear your thought pattern, and I want to see where Cameroonians are taking their ideas and what is important for Cameroonians at this point. However, when Issa Tchiroma Bakari announced that he had appointed Barrister Alice Nkom as the spokesperson of his presidency, many observers dismissed it as political theater. Some called it Facebook Republic, and some called it social media joke. But this move deserves closer attention, because whether it is social media or Facebook, everyone who is criticizing the appointment uses social media. Some of them even campaigned on social media. Therefore, it is not merely a campaign reshuffle. It is a signal both to Cameroonians and to the international community that Tchiroma intends to press forward with his victory, and he is doing so with two critical issues. One, a moral rectitude, and two, legal framing that the government would find very hard to ignore. Notably, the appointment decision was not issued as a campaign organization, but rather as an act of a parallel presidency. The presidency Tchiroma believes is the only legitimate presidency. That language matters because it tells us that Tchiroma is deepening and he is not softening his contestation and his reclamation of the official results. But the choice of Alice Nkom is even more symbolic. Why? Because Alice Nkom is not just any lawyer. She is one of the most internationally recognized human rights lawyers in Cameroon. Amnesty International, in a 2025 statement, described her as a long-standing defender of fundamental freedoms, noting that her legal work has repeatedly placed her at odds with the Republic of Cameroon. For many years, even decades, she has represented activists, political detainees, clients, and other figures who fall outside the comfort zone of the Cameroonian government. She has paid a price for that work by enduring surveillance, harassment, political pressure, and you all remember her office was recently sealed by a Tangaji Paul. But the seals were taken off. The iron woman that she is, she cut off that seal and dared the administrators to come take her off. She was summoned, but nothing ever happened after that. So why would Tchiroma choose such a figure with this profile? And why now, in the tense aftermath of the contested elections? Paul Biya said everything is done and dusted with the elections and Cameroonians should look forward. But Tchiroma and Cameroonians have refused. They are looking backwards, but not very far. They are looking at October 12th, the day they decided that Tchiroma is the president of Cameroon. And one reason for which they are doing this is very clear: the quest for legitimacy. In the eyes of many Cameroonians, particularly those who see themselves as outside the partisan structures, Barrister Nkom's moral authority is not trivial. Her credibility does not come from a party machinery or political patronage, but from a long-standing career that she has used to defend human rights even when they are risky. A campaign spokesperson can be a mere communicator, but in this case, she is a validator. She is not a spokesperson for the campaign, but for a government. At this material point, let's assume that Tchiroma was at the presidency in Etudi, following the results from the ballot box. Would he appoint Barrister Nkom as spokesperson? I don't think so. Appointing Barrister Nkom at this material moment speaks a different language, and her presence sends signals that Tchiroma's challenge to the election is rooted in legal and human rights concerns, and also international relations and diplomacy, rather than simple political ambition. This is critical because before joining Tchiroma, Nkom had openly supported Maurice Kamto. That is not hidden, it's very clear. Her endorsement shifted only after Kamto was disqualified from the race. And according to a report by Mimi Mefoinfo, she publicly backed Tchiroma as the candidate most capable of defending the constitutional order under normal circumstances. That sequence of support for Kamto, then Tchiroma, matters a lot. It positions her not as a partisan loyalist that is bent on respecting or on supporting one candidate, but as someone who responds to what she perceives as the critical moment in the life of the nation to bring the change that Cameroonians need and Cameroonians are longing for. The change that Cameroonians believe Issa Tchiroma incarnates. The second reason that makes her appointment critical is coalition building. Tchiroma's critics have often described him as polarizing, and historically, that is not unfair. He is actually polarizing. But his long career has moved through various ideological spaces. But by bringing in Barrister Nkom, he widens his coalition beyond traditional party politics. Simply because Barrister Nkom appeals to civil society activists, younger urban voters, and constituencies that see politics through a human rights-based approach rather than personality, or party politics. This does not guarantee broad-based support, of course, because of Barrister Nkom's activism in the past, and we can talk about that in a different video. But in a fragmented political environment, it may accelerate the consolidation of anti-regime voices. And if you follow Cameroonian politics closely, you know that opposition movements have hardly ever moved together because of ideology. Rather, they break up all the time because of personalities within those movements and also mistrust. But now, Barrister Nkom comes in not as a politician, but as a civil society activist. Perhaps uniquely, she has the trust of the groups that would align with Tchiroma on their own. Also remember, Tchiroma was the candidate of the Union for Change 2025. That Union for Change had as members political parties, but most importantly, civil society organizations. And Barrister Nkom is a leading voice in the civil society network in Cameroon. A third dimension of her appointment, which to me is very important, is her international standing. Cameroon's post-electoral crisis is gaining external attention, even though slowly. Many governments are cautious and waiting to see how events unfold. That is why most of the governments that matter have not spoken about the elections. They have not congratulated Paul Biya on the elections. We have a video on this. You can go back to watch that video. And we are definitely going to be doing another video because some events happened today that are definitely going to be read from a public relations standpoint, but we need to clarify those issues. However, Barrister Nkom is well known among international human rights organizations and donor governments. Therefore, her voice forces outsiders to pay attention to the legal framing of this dispute because it takes it out of the political spectacle and adds the human rights dimension into it. Barrister Nkom would better communicate and articulate the electoral crisis as a human rights issue above the political issue. At the international level, politics primes. So let's wait and see how Barrister Nkom plays into this through her communication role. When someone with a profile of Barrister Nkom decides to stand behind contested election claims, it invites scrutiny from around the world. It invites questions, and those questions are harder for the government to dismiss as propaganda. The CPDM government is skilled at dismissing everything as propaganda, Facebook, social media, but at this moment in the life of Cameroon, social media plays a critical role. So it should not be surprising that Barrister Nkom can use her networks to tap into resources and into people who would ask questions about what really happened during the vote. Were procedures violated? How has the state responded to dissent? Has the state accepted to audit results? These are the kinds of questions that international actors prefer to raise quietly. But Barrister Nkom's involvement makes quiet diplomacy less sustainable. Her activism, her voice, and her networks would definitely push the conversation out of quiet diplomacy into the public sphere. Now, what does this mean for the political trajectory of the country that lies ahead? First of all, it formalizes the existence of two competing authorities. The government under Paul Biya is insisting on stability and warning against crisis. And Paul Biya made this very clear when he declared that Cameroon cannot afford a post-electoral crisis with potentially devastating consequences. By that, he was referencing conflicts in other countries as cautionary tales. But history across Africa shows that where elections are widely perceived as rigged, post-electoral crisis is not merely possible, it is common. The severity of the post-electoral crisis simply varies depending on the strength of the opposition, the unity of the ruling elite, and the willingness of security forces to enforce political outcomes. In Cameroon, past disputes have not escalated dramatically because the opposition has often been weak or divided. That dynamic has shifted. Chiroma's move attempts to give the opposition something it has lacked for decades, that is, coherence. A spokesperson like Alice Nkom helps to consolidate messaging, discipline the narrative, and introduce legal precision into political claims. Secondly, we should not underestimate the symbolic power of a parallel government. Many dismiss such gestures as simply symbolic, but symbols matter in contested political transitions. Across African political history, self-declared governments have played various roles, from pressure groups to transnational leaders, to at times becoming the center of eventual power shifts. Thirdly, Barrister Alice Nkom's appointment is also a provocation. It risks escalating confrontation with the state. As we said, Barrister Nkom is already a figure the government watches closely. The government surely doesn't like when Barrister Nkom gets involved in political issues, especially with actors that they don't like. Her new role would only further invite pressure, but not on her, rather on the movement around Tchiroma. But who is strange to movement and pressures around Tchiroma? Tchiroma is already around undergoing severe pressure. So the regime has one option: suck the pressure on itself and realize that Chiroma's appointment of Barrister Nkom is simply internationalizing the post-elections dispute. And that is a red line for many incumbents who rely on tight narrative control. At this point, it is difficult for the CPDM government to control the narrative. Let me give you a few examples. Normally, they would use CRTV to control the narrative. Then the liberalization of the press came in. With the private media, they could control the narrative. How? By imposing sanctions on the various media houses, or even pressing them and pressuring them to follow the narrative they want to be spoken. But now, with independent media, podcasts like the Beyond Africa podcast, it is absolutely difficult to control the narrative. I will not be surprised if media houses in Cameroon fear to give their microphones to Barrister Alice Nkom to speak on behalf of Tchiroma. Why? Because those media houses are definitely going to face repercussion. But that is good news. We are online. We have the authority. We have the media. They will talk to us and everyone will receive that information. Simply because from a strategic perspective, Tchiroma seems to be betting that moral legitimacy, which means he is out there communicating with the people. If controlled media cannot give that access, he is definitely going to have it from independent media. And if his objective is to convince the public that he is the rightful president and not Biya, then aligning with someone like Barrister Alice Nkom, who symbolizes and uses constitutionalism and human rights, strengthens his argument. And what do we do here? We advance arguments that are based on the law and based on the Constitution. We open up our conversations to anyone. If you have a point, come and make it. We open you up to interviews, we ask questions, and if you can answer the questions, your viewpoints help the viewers to make better decisions. So at this point, where does this leave Cameroon? It leaves Cameroon at a turning point, a crossroads, a runabout, and Carrefour. When political authority is contested and narratives of legality diverge, two scenarios often emerge. The first scenario is repression, which is manifested by arrests, intimidation, and efforts to silence the narrative. The second is negotiation, and that negotiation comes across through pressure, public opinion, and international attention that pushes the ruling elite towards compromise or power sharing agreements. Again, we have had a video about power sharing agreements, and we even invited the former European Union ambassador to Cameroon to talk about it. Right now, we see more signs of the first than the second. That is, we see more signs of repression, arrest, intimidation, imprisonment than negotiation. Why? Because Paul Biya's regime has always believed in the use of force. But the appointment of Barrister Nkom can push the political system toward a more complex juncture, where they will simply be ignoring the opposition rather than engaging it, and also making it difficult for them to continue arresting people with international profiles because it will raise international attention to the questions. And also remember, this regime in Cameroon, Paul Biya's regime, believes so much in validation by the international community. So they don't like to do things that the international community would see as dangerous or as violating human rights. But Barrister Alice Nkom at this moment has the pedestal on which she can stand to showcase this even more than she has been doing before. Because now she wouldn't only be showcasing this as a problem of human rights, but also as a political problem that is aggravated by human rights abuses. So, in the broader historical sense, Chiroma's decision tells us something deeper about Cameroon's political moment. It suggests that the post Biya landscape is already taking shape. New alliances are forming, old ideologies and boundaries are collapsing, and human rights discourse, not party ideology, may become the central axis of political legitimacy. Whether you support Chiruma or not, whether you agree with Barrister Nkom or not, this development signals that the post election crisis is far from over. It is evolving, it is institutionalizing, and gathering figures who command both domestic respect and international credibility. In politics, personnel is always the strategy, and the appointment of Barrister Nkom is not mere personal choice. It is a message about legitimacy, resistance, and the kind of narrative Chiruma intends to build around his claim to the presidency. Cameroon now faces a question that will shape its immediate future. That question is, will this post-electoral crisis be resolved through force, intimidation, and arrests, or through dialogue? Chiruma's move suggests he is grounded in law, rights, and principle. The government's response will determine whether that pathway remains open. Please go to the comments section and tell me what you think. How do you think this is going to play out? Will Chiruma ultimately get to the presidency through actions like the appointment of Barrister Nkom? Or will the government continue using force down the line to intimidate, arrest, torture, imprison, and even kill Cameroonians? So after Chiruma appointed Barrister Nkom, Barrister Nkom sent out a message regarding that appointment. She said, "Today, a new page opens for our country. The president-elect Issa Tchiroma Bakari called me to assume the responsibility of spokesperson for the presidency. I accepted with respect, with seriousness, and with a deep sense of duty. This mission is not that of a single woman. It belongs to the Cameroonian people, to their sovereign will, to their desire to take back control of their destiny." Then she goes ahead to make commitments. She says, "I commit to faithfully carry the voice of the president-elect, share his vision with clarity, defend the truth with consistency, serve every Cameroonian with loyalty." Then she proceeds, "It is with humility and determination that I take part in this decisive step to accompany the change that the people expect and deserve. The voice of the president will be strong. My word will be clear. The truth will be non-negotiable. And Cameroon is entering an era of courage, responsibility, and transparency." Then she signs it, "Barrister Alice Nkom, official spokesperson of the president-elect of the Republic of Cameroon. For our children, for our dignity, for a future here and not elsewhere. Mom loves you." These are the acceptance words of Barrister Nkom. Tell me what you think. Drop that in the comments section. She would like to hear what you think about her acceptance speech. For the Beyond Africa podcast, I have been your host, Ngalim Bernard. What a time to be alive. What a time to follow Cameroonian politics. As usual, kindly like, share, subscribe, and comment. The coming days will be decisive, and we will continue to follow each development with the depth, context, and clarity that our audience deserves. We treat our audience with utmost respect. We bring you the best of the best in-depth analysis, commentaries, and interviews. Stay tuned and see you in our next podcast.